Okay, let's get started and hopefully more folks will trickle in. So hello everyone, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight to learn about voting rights in Virginia. My name is Catherine Sotaro and I am the Hampton Roads organizer at Virginia LCV. Virginia LCV stands for the Virginia League of Conservation Voters. If you weren't aware, a major part of our mission at Virginia LCV is to build a stronger, more diverse, and more engaged conservation voter movement in order to protect the natural environment and improve the quality of life of all Virginians. We envision an equitable and just Virginia where all communities enjoy clean air and water, open space, a livable climate, and a democracy that works for all Virginians. So tonight, this webinar will serve as a space to learn more about voting rights issues in the state of Virginia, amendment processes, restoration of voting rights, and relevant legislation from the 2024 General Assembly session. Virginia is one of the only states in the nation that permanently strips convicted felons' voting rights, requiring felons to petition the state to have their rights restored upon release. Each year, Governor Youngkin has restored fewer and fewer felons' voting rights, going from just under 4,000 in 2022 to just 2,500 in 2023. Please consider signing the petition that is being shared in the chat, which calls for an end to this unjust process. Thank you, Jordan, for sharing that. So we will start off hearing from each of our great panelists that are joining us tonight. First off, Delegate Price, then Senator Rouse, and Dr. Walker and Dr. Smith of the Mann Foundation. And we will have time for some questions and answers at the end. So please type any questions you end up having throughout the webinar in the chat or the Q&A boxes below. And then we'll start off with, some pre-submitted questions that were submitted while registering. So first off, we are going to be hearing from Delegate Marcia Price. Delegate Price is currently serving her 5th term in the House of Delegates and currently representing the new 85th House District. She's the chief sponsor of the Voting Rights Act of Virginia and works for voting rights, housing justice, and gun violence prevention, among other issues. She currently serves on the Health and Human Services Committee and is chair for the Health Professions Subcommittee and a member of the Health Subcommittee. On the General Laws Committee, she serves as the ABC Gaming Subcommittee and the Housing Consumer Protections Subcommittee. And she is the first Black woman to serve as the chair of the House Privileges and Elections Committee, and we are so grateful to have her joining us today. And so I just want to start off with a quick question. So she's going to give us an overview of her experience during the 2024 session. So while serving as the chair of the Privileges and Elections Committee, what were any good or bad House bills pertaining to voting rights that came through committee? And can you just tell us more about your voting rights advocacy work and the Voting Rights Act of Virginia, of which we're chief sponsor? Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I am very glad to share the stage, especially with Senator Rouse. And so this was, I think, a very exciting session because we were able to build on some of the work that we had done in 2020 and 2021 when there was, I guess, the last time we had a pro-democracy General Assembly. So in 2020, I worked on a bill that would make political, racial, and prison gerrymandering illegal. And that became law. And so that was really fruit of labor with a lot of advocates, especially New Virginia Majority. We had been trying ever since I had gotten elected and first started serving in 2016, but we were able to get it done then with the new composition of the General Assembly that year. And so that was huge. That put Virginia on the map, along with a ton of other voting rights bills that allowed for access when we had the 45 days of early voting, when we had Sunday voting, all of the things that we did between 2020 and 2021 to make voting easiest. And you guys may have heard this before, but we went from the second hardest state to vote in to the 11th easiest state to vote in. And that was because of the intentional work that we did in 2020 and 2021. So we can go over some of that, but it's no coincidence then that we had the highest number of voters participate in the elections after those things went through. And then in 2021, that's when we did the Voting Rights Act of Virginia. And if you're not familiar with that, it had a few components, but one that's really important right now is that was the first time that a disenfranchised voter could actually sue on their own or have the Attorney General sue on their behalf if they had been disenfranchised. And so that was really big, in addition to making sure that local elections were fair. Like if a city was going from ward districts to at large, making sure that the protected classes did not have their voting power negatively impacted. We also brought language access from the federal level to state and local level elections, which was really huge. And then one of the other important things nowadays is we made sure to crack down on misinformation and voter intimidation. And that was very specific to voters, and that, and I'll talk about how we wanted to expand that to other people later. But the new thing that we did, because the Voting Rights Act of Virginia was modeled after the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And so then there were states that had a history of having very intentional voter suppression tactics. And so when the Fed stepped in, they made sure that any changes that they did had to be pre-cleared by the DOJ in order to move forward. So instead of going that specific route, we put in a thing. If you were changing location of voting precincts, if you were changing the days that you had for early voting or those sorts of things, you either had to get it pre-cleared by the Attorney General, or you had to have 30 days of it being out in front of the public. The public could comment on it before you actually enacted it. And that was just to show, like, some of these changes were being made behind the scenes. So you look up one day where you've been voting for 20 years was just all of a sudden changed, and it was changed to somewhere that was off the beaten path. It wasn't easy to get to on the bus routes. So we were trying to prevent some of that. And then what you saw when there was another shift in power in 2022 and 2023 to anti-democracy majority, at least in the House, every single thing that we had passed, there was a bill trying to pull it back. But luckily, the Senate had a pro-democracy majority, and they were that brick wall that that stopped a lot of those bills from going through. So I do some work with my day job as Virginia Block. And so I have an in for voting rights on that too. And one of the things that we teach is if you look from president on down to maybe if you have a county water and soil conservation person, there are about 20 elected officials that every day are working to make decisions on your behalf. And so if there are policies in place that impede you from being able to help choose those 20 people, that just compounds the effect of them making decisions that may or may not reflect your lived experience. So it's really important that not only do we vote, but that we stay engaged and in tune to make sure that we're protecting those rights all the way through. So don't just take, Senator Rouse and I, we're good with our word, but don't take our word for it. Look at our votes, look at the bills that we put up, and have that accountability so that are we making good on the promises that we made on the campaign trail. And I'll just go over, because I know that Senator Rouse and I might have some similar legislation that we want to bring up. But from the 2024 session, the role of chair really is, one, I need to make sure that I'm having efficient meetings to make sure that the bills that we're voting on have a fair hearing, and then also too, to make sure that what's being said is really the truth. And so you had some people that would come up and say, well, we need to do this because there's so much voter fraud. And, it was our job to say, okay, prove it. Where are your receipts? Because I don't have a lot of receipts for voter fraud, but I have a heck of a lot of receipts for voter suppression. And so making sure that we were being factual in how we were discussing legislation. I think some of the campaign finance bills that were brought forward were very good. We did not get them over the finish line, but I think with more pressure, we absolutely can. But as part of voting rights, who you're voting for, you need to know who we're taking money from, who we're being held accountable to as well when it comes to that. But making sure that curbside voting was available for those with disabilities. And right now, the law says physical disabilities. Well, House Bill 441, I think the governor signed this one, but we'll have to make sure. But that would make sure that any person with a disability would be able to vote curbside. Um, you'll see on the federal level, they're trying to make it so that only the DOJ can really interact with voter disenfranchisement. And like I told you, on our level, the AG or the voter can do it. So we had House Bill 623 that would also say an organization like the NAACP or New Virginia Majority could, Virginia League of Conservation Voters could sue on behalf of the voter. And so we got that one done. We'll see if the governor signs that. Trying to make sure that, well, this one got vetoed recently, but trying to keep firearms away from polling places so that we don't have intimidation, and making sure that when you're going to vote, that you are safe and protected just like anywhere else. I'll let Senator Rouse talk about some of his bills, but we worked together on one. So when different systems give information to the Department of Elections, that information is used on voter purges. And so we found that the police, I'm sorry, the state police, their records were erroneous, and that erroneous information was used to purge more than 3,000 people that should not have been purged. So we were working on list maintenance, and you'll hear some people talk about list maintenance in more political terms, where they want to be able to challenge voters right there at the station, and at the polling place, intimidate you, and make sure that you're scared to vote. Our list maintenance was, if we're going to kick somebody off the rolls, let's make sure it's good information, and let's make sure we're confident that the information is coming from it. Because if you're kicked as inactive, or if you're kicked off the voter rolls, the only thing that's really saving you to be able to participate is that we have same-day voter registration, which others were trying to roll back, right? So all of this is connected. I'm sure there's lots more that I can talk about, but when we're talking about whether or not we're a part of ERIC, or who we're working together with to make sure our voting rolls are clean and clear, we have to make sure that that is not just buzzwords for let's be able to purge anyone, but that we're using it on good information so that voters that should be able to vote are not kicked off the voting rolls. So I think that's where a lot of our energy went this session. And so I'll definitely be here for any other questions, but I think that's my kind of trajectory along with voting rights. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you, Delegate Bryce. You mentioned ERIC. So Governor Youngkin recently vetoed SB 606, which would have required Virginia to return to the Electronic Registration Information Center. Can you explain the significance of ERIC and why it was important to Virginia to rejoin?
Yeah, so under Republican Governor Bob McDonnell, Virginia entered into ERIC, and basically it's a system where different states work together to make sure, if someone moved from Virginia to North Carolina and they're registered and voting in North Carolina, then they come off the Virginia rolls. If someone passed, then they come off the rolls based off death certificates. And so, of course, people are moving between different states. And so it helped us have a centralized location where we were making sure that the records we were using to purge voters, or the records we were using to keep voters on the roll, were accurate. Unfortunately, as we've seen people, whether they were storming the Capitol or January 6th, or lying through their teeth in public comment on some of these bills, they've tried to malign ERIC as some like super political, super blue Democratic organization, when literally it is just a way for us to make sure that the information that we have is accurate, so that we're not kicking people off the rolls. One of the talking points that they had was, we don't know who's funding it. And I'm like, okay, Don't believe any of that, because when we asked for receipts, it was wild. There were none. And even the current commissioner for our elections has raved about how important Eric was. And I honestly think that her arm was twisted in order to pull out of it because of these political talking points. But right now, we're in a situation where we're in a hodgepodge of like loose MOUs with states that may not have the same confidence rate in their data in how we're determining whether or not a Virginian can stay on the rolls or not. And so it is not surprising, but very disappointing that the governor would veto that, and that this would become so political when it's really about using quality data to make sure that if you're supposed to be on the voting rolls, you get to stay, and if you're not supposed to be on the voting rolls, that you're properly taken off.
Thank you so much for that explanation, Delegate Price, and appreciate you explaining everything that you talked about. So next up, what we will be hearing from Senator Aaron Rouse. Senator Rouse is currently serving his second term in the Senate of Virginia, representing the new 22nd Senate District. He's the chair of the Senate Privileges and Elections Committee and is a member of the Commerce and Labor, General Laws and Technology, Rehabilitation and Social Services, and Rules Committees. So Senator Rouse, take it away.
Thank you so much, Catherine. First off, before we begin, I just want to say I will always yield the floor to Delegate Price. She is a champion and has been a consistent champion when it comes to voting rights. And, as the chair of P&E in the Senate, the many times I've reached out to Delegate Price to make sure that I understood, had all the history and data and information when it comes to voting rights bills. And she's just a wealth of knowledge. So, Delegate Price, thank you for all of your work and what you have done. And when we talk about voting rights and what it means going forward in our democracy, in our nation, I can't think of any more important committees than privileges and elections right now, because in the Senate, while we have only 40 members, we saw a number of bills that tried to come through P&E, but we weren't having that. But a number of bills that tried to take away early voting, right? That tried to take away restoration of rights of voting. They even came, Republican colleagues, they talk about safe polling places where intimidation was a huge thing in elections, as we've seen, and it's only been getting worse and worse. And so when we try to put in legislation and laws to protect not only just voters coming to vote, exercise their right to vote, but also volunteers and workers who in registrar's office, where they're just going to work, try to ensure democracy is safe and protected. Talk about campaign finance as well. I mean, what we essentially have here is the front lines of safeguarding democracy. And for Virginia, we have always had, and at least I feel this way, we've always been the leader of our nation when it comes to setting a tone, right? And protecting our democracy. And here in 2024, where we realize what we're up against once again, that if, President Joe Biden is not reelected, what would America look like then, when only certain people of economic class or race will be allowed to vote? And so, I am very, 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 very laser focused when it comes to not only just voting rights, but protecting our democracy as a whole. My journey, I served on local office and city council, where I had a first upfront, front row seat when it come to assault on democracy. And I'm talking about the Virginia Beach election system, where we used to have a hybrid voting system in the city of Virginia Beach, which was the only one like it in the nation. And if you understood the history of the city of Virginia Beach, well, Norfolk was majority African American at one point in time. Had I shouldn't say majority, but had a very, very large African American population. And when they start annexing the surrounding region, Virginia Beach hurry up and became a city, so they couldn't be annexed. And they implemented a hybrid voting system And what this system essentially did is it had a residency requirement, right? Which means if you're going to run in the district, you just had to live in that district. But yet, here's the kicker: everyone in the city could vote for who represented that district. So if you were a minority in the city, the majority block, which they always vote in the block, they would basically dilute your voting power. And so it's the reason why at the time where I was elected in 2018, I was only the fourth African American to be elected ever in the city of Virginia Beach. There was only one Asian American that was ever elected in the city of Virginia Beach, and that still holds true today. And so thanks to the Voting Rights Act, that Delegate Price was the chief co-patron of it and one of the architects of it, there was a federal lawsuit that was brought by two women of color, and they challenged the voting rights system at the federal level. And the federal court said, you're absolutely right. The hybrid voting system violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And so we're going to mandate you go to a district system, a true district system, true representative system, to where someone that lives in your community and your district, that's who you vote for, and no one else who lives outside of that district can vote for, and diluting your voting power. And so the city of Virginia Beach, the Good Old Boy Network, is still alive and thriving. They sought to appeal that decision, and spent millions of dollars trying to appeal that decision. And so they appealed it to the Fourth Circuit Court of Virginia. And basically, because of state law, Virginia Voting Rights Act of Virginia, that decision to uphold district voting was upheld from the federal level. And they said, the case is essentially moot because the state law has changed. Federal courts has already did their due diligence. And now what we're seeing, where we had a true district voting election in 2022, it yielded the most diverse city council ever. And not just from when we talk about diversity, we always think of, racially diverse. Well, we're talking about generationally. We're talking about economically diverse as well. We're talking about gender and diversity also. And so it yielded the most diverse city council ever. And yet still the last piece of that puzzle is to align the city charter, which is now out of alignment because of the federal courts and state law, which I just explained. The last piece is just to align the city charter, in which the bill I brought forth this past session, which passed the Senate unanimously, but there was a lot of Republican folks in the House going around doing some things that it wasn't above board, essentially lying about the position on City of Virginia Beach position on this. And by the way, the City of Virginia Beach did a public information gathering on this, on the District 10-1 district system. And it found that over 81% of the people in Virginia Beach supported the 10-1 system. So over 81%. And not only that, a supermajority of city council voted to change the charter to align with the new voting system. And so that bill is now before the governor, and the governor is trying to delay the enactment of the charter. And so I imagine we'll have some work to do when we come back for a reconvene session. But the point I'm making is that even when we win these court battles that expands voting rights, that allows for inclusivity of voting rights, and it comes back down, you have to vote. Democracy is something we fight for every single year. Like, the battle is always ahead. Even when you win the battle, you still have to fight to keep it, because the alternative, people are fighting to take it away. And so I am just elated that I have a partner in the House who we are very much aligned with, again, she's the leading expert. When I have a question, I call Delegate Price and I say, okay, what's the history on this? Give me the lowdown. And we work very, very closely together. But there's so much more work to do. And it's the reason why, taking time out my day after a long session, and I get a chance to see my 10-year-old daughter, and I say, listen, Daddy has some important work to do right now, Make sure your homework is done. But this is so important because her future is dependent upon it. And we haven't even begun to talk about constitutional amendments, which we've already taken the first step now this year of introducing those. And I'm looking forward to 2025 and making sure we can send those to the governor's desk and make sure we can get those out of the General Assembly and do our job and make sure this governor, cross our fingers, make sure he signs it, which I don't have high hopes in that, but we still have work to do. And so I'm honored to be here tonight with women as well. I look on my screen and I see so many strong women on this screen. I'm like, I'm in the right place to be. And so I'm looking forward to this discussion and any questions you may get. But any tough questions, send them to Delegate Price, and she will give you all the lowdown on it.
Thank you, Senator Rouse. I do have a question, and if you're unable to answer it, Delegate Price, feel free to chime in.
Right.
So the Virginia Constitution states that no person who has been convicted of a felony shall be qualified to vote unless his civil rights have been restored by the governor or other appropriate authority. During this past session, Senate Joint Resolution number 2 and House Joint Resolution number 2 were introduced to amend the Virginia Constitution. What is the process of getting a constitutional amendment passed in Virginia?
Great question. Great question. So all constitutional amendments are introduced in odd number years. And so the first step is odd number years, get it introduced. And then once it's introduced, we go through the process. It's going to take 2 cycles to get those. Make sure I'm saying that right. It takes 2 General Assembly sessions to get those referendums through. So this will be the first reading in 2025. Then it has to come back again in 2026 to get a second reading before it can get to the governor's desk for up or down. Delegate Price is going to.
No, you were right. The wonderful thing about it is it doesn't have to go to the governor though.
Great.
After we pass it twice, it goes straight to the people.
That's right, for referendum. And so that will be the process. One thing though, what you all need to understand also is that the process in which someone goes to get their rights restored has been completely upended by this governor, right? His administration has now done this on a case-by-case basis. And if you know anything about the judicial system and getting your rights back, even just trying to pay a fine at the local level, there are so many steps you have to get through, right? Just to be able to get a completion on what you're trying to accomplish. And the fact that this governor has upended this process in restoring rights of those who's trying to get their lives back on track, be reintroduced into society, become upstanding citizens. In fact, we all, and I had a lot of family members who've gone off and unfortunately done time in jail or prison, and they go, they send us to jail or prison and to get rehabilitated, and we come out and we face this obstacle of trying to get back inside of society. And so what options are them to really, get back and feel like they're a part of society? And we've seen that in cases where recidivism is very, very high because people feel like, well, if I can't get a job, I can't get a license, I can't vote, then I don't have a say in the society. So I might as well continue to do what I do. You understand voting is essentially a part of what makes us American. This is the greatest democracy in the world. And so having an opportunity to vote means you have a stake in what happens in this country and that you have a say-so and you care about what's going on in this country. Not having that right to vote is debilitating to anyone, right? And so that process, which again, we have to work with this governor for at least another 2 years, year and a half. But it's one that we have to get right. Because again, we don't throw, at least I don't want to get religious or anything, but we don't throw anyone away. Right? We don't throw anyone away. And we have to provide opportunities for members who have made a mistake and then once upon a lifetime to be back involved in our society. Because here's the other side, and I tell my Republican colleagues, they're members, people who want to cut Social Security. They don't like, Medicaid. They don't like, people being dependent on the government, right? And we see that with Medicare expansion, education. We try to make sure our kids eat. If you don't like people being dependent on the government, then you have to provide them an opportunity to be involved in society so they can take care of themselves. You you can't have it both ways. You can't. And so that's one argument perspective I like to pose to some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and I like to see them squirm and try to answer it. But again, we have so much more work to do, and I'll be quiet now because sometimes I can ramble on this subject because I'm so passionate about it. But understanding what's at stake here when we talk about voting, and not just at the federal level, but then not just at the state level, but also at the local level, and not just for city council, but for school board, but also for constitutional offices as well. They are so important, like so important, and it matters how we live. It matters that we have to take advantage of this opportunity to vote in every single election there is.
Thank you, Senator Rouse, and no need to apologize for being passionate about important issues. We are so glad to have, leaders like you in office. So I just wanted to thank you both. Thank you, Senator Rouse. Thank you, Delegate Price, for being amazing leaders in the Senate and in the House, and not allowing, any unfavorable bills to make it, through your committees. So
Mhm.
thank you both so much. And next, we will be hearing from Dr. Jacqueline Walker and Dr. Velvet Smith of the Mann Foundation. Dr. Walker is the executive director, and Dr. Smith is the chairman of the board of the Mann Foundation, which stands for Men Alleviating Negativity. And it's dedicated to incarcerated individuals, returning citizens, and their families that want to end recidivism through training, workshops, counseling sessions, and community outreach. So Dr. Walker and Dr. Smith, please take it away.
Thank you. Good evening. We're so elated to be here. One thing that you didn't say in our bios that we're both educators. So we're actually going to share our screen. So we have a short presentation that you're able to see because this is what we do. To ensure everyone is informed. So I am actually going to do slides 1 through 6. And Dr. Smith is going to do slides 7 through 12, but we will still remain within our 10-minute time frame. So I'm going to go ahead and start from the beginning. So we just want to talk a little bit about the Mann Foundation. It was established July 17, 2015. And it was from basically turning pain into purpose and passion. So we're not going to get on exactly what we do as it relates to everything that we do in the community, but we are going to talk about what we do as it relates to restoration of rights and the education of voting rights. So our motto is the secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. And that's by Socrates. And we always put this out there into the atmosphere and have our clients to manifest this because it doesn't matter about where you come from. It talks about more solely about where you're going. So I'm going to show you a short clip that I had to record on my phone from the movie Shirley. And then I'm going to tell you how this relates to our.
And I hear you talk about people having the power to make change. And I don't know where to start. Are you registered to vote? Registered? Little girl, the first thing you've got to do is vote. That ain't my scene. Voting's bourgeois politics. If all you're doing is outside yelling and screaming, that's all you're ever going to be. A yeller and a screamer. You have to be part of the process. The process doesn't exist in politics for Black women. You're different. I saw what needed to be done, and I did it.
So the reason why we're showing this clip is because when we tell our clients who are either incarcerated, because we teach every week behind bars, or if they are returning citizens, which means that they're just coming out of the correctional facility, that's what they ask us. That's for bourgeois politics. Why should I register to vote? And as you heard in the movie in this clip, the young lady responds back, "It's not a place for Black women." But in their conversation to us, they said there's not a place for felons, which we know not to be true, because we have a lot of people that have convicted felonies that have received their right to vote, that it has been restored, that are in political positions. But this is what we deal with when we're asking people who kind of feels like they've been disenfranchised their entire life to actually get out and vote. So what we actually do is that we have these classes and we have other pieces that we do to be able to get them motivated to want to do that. So the Mann Foundation undertakes a comprehensive approach to support incarcerated individuals in restoring their rights and preparing them to register to vote. Here's how we're accomplishing this. So we incorporate civic education. The foundation offers in-prison courses on civic duties and the voting process, alongside workshops on legal rights and the restoration process. We educate incarcerated individuals about their civic responsibilities and their rights. We also focus on pre-release preparation. We provide pre-release counseling on restoring rights and detailed sessions on how to register to vote, ensuring that individuals are prepared for civic participation upon release. So, as we've heard talked about today, that when Governor Northam was in office on March the 16th, 2021, then he gave the right to vote back to every person that was incarcerated once they were released. It didn't matter if they were on probation or not. Once they were released, that happened on March 16th, 2021. What we did as a foundation to ensure that process was happening, we got on it very quickly, and we did a restoration of rights and voter registration drive, because they didn't have to restore their rights because they were already restored. So all we had to do was register them. In that process of registering them, we let them know that they will also be able to hold political office. They will also be able to serve on a jury, and they also could be a notary if they choose to do so, because they were getting back those rights once the governor had given them to them. So in saying that, we
For
had
decades,
a story
thousands of men
that was
and
on
women
10
lost
that we
their
want you to
right to
see.
vote because they were convicted felons. In Virginia and across the country, rights are being restored so that returning citizens can participate in this cornerstone of democracy. Heroin addiction landed Ronald Whitehead behind bars for 11 years. In 2017, he gave his life to Christ and met his future wife, who was a Portsmouth jail employee. In prison for 3 years, he had a long time to process his past.
Growing up in the projects in Portsmouth, you saw a lot of things, you've been around a lot of things, and some of it was very traumatic. But I thank God they kept his grace on me, and I made it out.
He made it out May 1st, 2020. On May 1st, 2021, Whitehead will become a registered voter. This executive order from the governor restores Whitehead's right to vote, serve in public office, on a jury, and as a notary. He's a client of the nonprofit Men Alleviating Negativity.
And maybe one day I hope that he can run for office and be able to show that everyone deserves a second chance.
Governor Northam has given a second chance to 69,000 returning citizens. Now the Mann Foundation is calling on employers to give former felons a chance.
They want to be a part of society. They want to be productive and be employed.
Whitehead is grateful for a new wife and a new life.
I just want everybody to know that it's not easy. There's still a lot of adversities out here that come at you from the left to the right, but you got to push past them. You got to stand firm in the word of God, and he will prepare you through.
Once registered, Whitehead this year will vote for the first time in his life. The drive-through voter registration event takes place Saturday 2 to 4 at the Sheriff's Training Facility at 1725 Green Street. For more information, see this story on wavy.com.
Okay, I'm turning it over to Dr. Smith.
So
The Man Foundation engages with our external partners. We collaborate with different advocacy groups, bringing expertise and resources into the jails and prisons to support inmates effectively. We enhance their reentry programs. We integrate civic reintegration components into existing reentry support service, and we distribute information widely through brochures, informational sessions, and digital platforms. The foundation ensures that incarcerated individuals and returning citizens have easy access to information on civic engagement and voting rights restoration. So here you will see where we did our voter registration drive that Governor Northam at that time, he retweeted what we had done when they covered us on the Virginia pilot when we were there registering people to vote. And this is a picture of us and our board who were out there on May 1st registering people to vote. So here you're about to watch a video, and what I'm most proud of in this video is you're going to see my brother who had spent 34 years in the penitentiary, and I was the one that was able to register him to vote. He's going to talk about that along with one of his friends.
These two men I spoke with were able to vote for the first time last year for a new governor, and they plan on voting again this year. And that right is something they never thought they'd have again. Keith Godwin and Christopher Richardson were just kids when they say a series of poor choices landed them behind bars. Both Portsmouth men serving 34 years. They were just released in 2019.
Having a felony on your record can hinder you from jobs. It can hinder you from other opportunities that a normal citizen that doesn't have a felony would be eligible for.
That includes voting. Those convicted of felonies in Virginia lose that right. But after a policy change last year speeding up the process, those who've served their sentences could have that civil right restored without going through a lengthy probation period. Godwin remembering casting his ballot for the first time last year.
It was a feeling of power. It made me feel like I had a voice again.
Richardson also had his voting rights restored. They say they couldn't have gotten through the paperwork without the Portsmouth-based nonprofit, the Man Foundation.
That language in those forms can be foreign.
The Man Foundation stands for Men Alleviating Negativity. For years, they've helped felons gain their right to vote and become contributing members of society.
They can be the change agent that they would like to see in their local community. When they may feel like they're on the outside, they actually can really be that returning citizens.
Both men say not only do they feel like they have their lives back, but also their voices.
We must vote because in order to get your voice heard, you have to, you got to vote.
And on top of being able to vote, those who've had their rights restored can also serve on a jury, be a notary, and even run for office. All opportunities both Godwin and Richardson are setting their sights on. In Portsmouth, Antoinette Delbel, News 3. These two men
So, like I said, that was my brother Keith Godwin, as well as Christopher, who had voted in the election the first time in 34 years. So we have some exciting upcoming events that we're doing with the Man Foundation. On July 13th, we're doing another Restoration of Rights events at 12 p.m. And on September the 17th, 2024, on National Voter Registration Day, we're having another event at 6 p.m. And we partner with the Portsmouth Sheriff's Department, and we're going to have those events at their training academy on Green Street. So additional details will be coming soon, and you can contact us if you're interested. And you can see all of our contact information here, our Twitter, IG, Facebook, and our Cash App handles.
Thank you so much, Dr. Walker and Dr. Smith. You guys are doing amazing work at the Man Foundation. It's just very admirable. So now we are going to get into the question and answer portion. We have about 14 minutes left of the webinar. So I'm going to ask the first question that was submitted online. How can we pressure Governor Youngkin to restore more rights?
That's a great question. I would say I don't think you can. I think we are a co-equal branch of government. Our job is to get this strong piece of legislation to the restoration of rights, as an example, out the General Assembly, which is very, very tough. Good thing we're in a majority right now, so we've seen some better days. But also, once it gets to the governor's desk, I think it becomes a multifaceted approach, not just from members of the General Assembly, but members of the community as well, to advocate, to write those letters, to show up at his administrations, to put the governor, so to speak, on blast. And so it takes more than just us at the General Assembly getting these pieces of legislation through the legislative process. Is when they come out on the other end. Now it's time for all of us to be advocating along the way, to put pressure on the governor.
Yeah, I would just add right now, I do think, there is the time sensitive nature of wanting or advocating for the governor to sign the bills that pass that would be good for democracy. As far as for restoration of rights, like I said, the good thing about that is we don't have to really go to the governor for that. So if those of us that are already elected now are going to do our job to get that passed that first go round in 2025, there's going to be an election for House members in that year, right? So then it would be to support people that support the restoration of rights amendment, because again, as Senator Rouse said, it has to pass again in 2026, and then it goes right to the public. And so that's really when there has to be, I think, starting in 2025, a public information campaign to make sure. Right now we're polling at well over the 51% that we would need to pass it, right? But making sure everybody understands they have to show up, they have to support it. That's how we get the restoration of rights done. Like the wonderful people that were highlighted in those video, and all of the people that we know in our lives who have been justice or court involved, their rights should not be up to the political spectrum of who is governor at the time. It should be a set process, no matter who's governor, and that's how we can get it done. But right now, I do think you can reach out, and I'll put the link in the chat, but you can reach out to the governor and say, hey, sign these bills that were great for democracy, the list maintenance. He already vetoed the Eric one, so we know that's not, but there's Senate Bill 300, there's House Bill 904, there's House Bill 623. There's a ton left that are still there that he has the opportunity to sign.
Thank you, Senator Rouse and Delegate Price. So the next question was submitted live. What areas in Virginia would be important to do public education to encourage votes in favor of restoration issues? It has been bipartisan in the past. Where are potential votes?
Everywhere. Honestly, if you look at the polling, I know that there was recent polling that was broken down by geographic location, but the fact that people should, after they've served their time, be able to move on with their life, get their rights back, that was polling at, I believe, 65%. And if you break it down into the geographical locations, there is support for it everywhere. So I'm not even sure that it's really, I know we have to do the persuasion techniques, but I think it's really going to be, hey, this is on your ballot in 2026, once we get it to the people, more so making sure they understand the importance of showing up and voting yes, and how they get registered to vote, or how they get, prepared to vote for it. But I think this is going to have to be, and everybody in the Commonwealth gets educated on it in order to do it, in order for us to really get it done.
Thank you. The next question. So what message do you have to advocates of campaign finance reform? Virginia is ranked 46 out of 50 in the SWAMP Index because of lack of transparency and accountability to citizens. We have weak campaign finance and ethics laws. Is there an appetite for reform?
I think, Virginia is one of 3 states in the Commonwealth where there's no limits on giving at the state level as well. So I think if we're going to modernize and update our campaign laws, campaign finance laws, there's so many different political perspectives out there that, when campaign finance laws comes, you can't just necessarily choose one industry from another one, because then people have there's different political alliances whatsoever. I think you just have to make sure that we're talking about transparency in its totality and accountability in its totality, and not necessarily, pick winners and losers, or who should be, reporting or transparency here or there. If we're going to do it, everyone should be under the same umbrella of campaign finance reform.
And I think also there is an appetite. We just have to make sure that, as Senator Rouse said, that there are votes for the specific bills that come through. We're not going to send a bill to the floor that doesn't have the votes to pass. A lot of the things that we already know, it's about like, to put it out there plainly, because I think Senator Rouse is being nice. So there was a bill that basically said, regulated monopolies, utilities couldn't be a part of it, right? So that was probably a shot at Dominion. But then there are other people that are like, well, Amazon shouldn't have, undue say over certain bills either. So why is it just Dominion? And so there's some of us that are like, yeah, we should overhaul all of this. And then there were some people who were like, well, no, I'm more, comfortable with a more targeted approach. I think you'll see a lot more public conversation about this. But if you have a certain opinion about which way it should go, who it should be, and what it should be for, at least for like the bill for no personal use of campaign funds, I would say reach out to your delegate or senator, continue to send the emails, because I know I'm still getting the emails, continue to send the emails to us as chairs so that we can share that with our caucuses and with, across the board to make sure people understand where y'all stand. But I think also remember that we were elected for a term, and there's another year in the term. And so not everything may have gotten done this year, but there's still ongoing conversations, and also what meetings might happen in the interim. None of the conversations that died during session are actually dead. They're still very much alive. And we look forward to continuing those conversations.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Okay, so how can felons find out if their voting rights are restored? And then I also want to ask Lauren's question, is there any data that tells us approximately how many citizens are waiting for their rights to be restored?
So in order to find out if their rights have been restored, you go to restore.va.gov, and then they can check to see if their rights have been restored. Unbeknownst to me, I haven't received any data, and we reach out quite often to see about the people who are in our process of we're helping them to get the rights restored, but no one has ever told us, like, it's 2,000 people that are waiting. And I'm quite sure that data has to be out there. I'm just not sure how we go about getting it.
So that the data exists, but it doesn't have to be out there. And that's one of the problems, Dr. Walker. Like the process is typically more transparent, but this administration has chosen for it to not be a transparent process, for it to be completely arbitrary. And so you have people like, we used to be able to track and say, okay, we used to have it down to the number of weeks. If you get your application within, and we can tell you within 3 weeks, under Northam or under McAuliffe, it would take about 3 weeks. You would have either a phone call coming your way or your certificate coming your way, and then we can help you register after you receive that. Now, it is so arbitrary that they won't even publish what their criteria are in order to decide whose rights they're restoring and whose aren't. And this is the problem that we're saying. It should not fluctuate between different governors. It should not be an opaque process. It should be absolutely transparent. There should be a golden standard of who gets restored and who doesn't, or everybody get restored, or maybe they don't ever lose their rights, but that's a different conversation. But right now the data is not public because the transparency has gone from the process. And I think that is what should be a driver. Even if you're not sure how you feel about, restoration of rights, if you're a good government person, you should be for transparency. You should be for set standards. You should be for less arbitrary decisions when it comes to someone's entry point into our democracy. And so I appreciate the work y'all are doing, but it's not your fault that you don't have the information.
Thank you, Dr. Walker and Delegate Price. And thank you, Senator Rouse, Dr. Smith, all of our great speakers tonight. You shared some very valuable information that we could take away and take action on. So thank you all so much, and have a great evening.